until they shut down the entire lines west. It was the biggest railroad abandonment in its history. It had been everything from Miles City, Montana, out to Tacoma and Fort Hills. One day it was a viable important railroad, and the next day it was all done. I worked my last day on February 29th, 1980. I was thankful that it was a leap year because it gave me one extra day to work. And I only have to sit around and cry my beer every 4 years. But I was working at Everett as the train order operator at the Everett Depot when we ran the last train up the valley. So I copied train orders for that train on that day. And that day I had to copy them twice because they had 2 locomotives back to back, and one of the locomotives, something went wrong with it at the engine terminal up there midday, so they couldn't use that, and that was the lead-in that they had already put the train orders out for. So the dispatcher called, and I had to recopy the orders for the other locomotive. And so the last train through here wasn't very impressive because it only had 1 locomotive and it was running backwards. Pulled the train up the valley. But I saved a set of these orders because I knew it was going to be a historic event, the last train going through the valley. So I've had these for 50 years now.
How many cars on the train?
Pardon?
How many cars on the last train?
The last train had 6 loads, 29 empties, and it was and it weighed 1,324 tons.
What was the load?
Probably lumber products and stuff. Everett had EA door company that shipped lots of doors, and then you had the various warehouses or mills that all shipped lumber.
So we do have one more, Alan, one more introduction. Dave Spru is on the phone. Dave, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, can you go ahead and tell a little bit about yourself, Dave?
Well, I learned how to be a train order operator or a telegrapher in the Great Northern / Milwaukee joint station at Monroe. And as a consequence of that, I got to know all of the crews on the Milwaukee Everett line that Alan is telling about. And in later years, I went to work for the Northern Pacific, which became the Burlington Northern, and I wound up working at Maple Valley on the Milwaukee main line, where it joins with a Burlington Northern main line. And it was kind of a reunion sort of a situation because I knew all of those guys from when they were on the Everett line. And I worked at Maple Valley for 10 more years and off and on for 10 more years. And the Milwaukee folded up at the end of those 10 years, and I went full-time into the Burlington Northern Seattle dispatcher's office. And after the Milwaukee folded up, I kind of tried to stay in touch with most of the people that I knew. I was living around the Tacoma, Seattle area, and that wasn't hard for me to do, and I just sort of did that. I kept in contact with most of them. Just about all of them have passed away by now because all of them were a lot older than me, and kind of leaves Alan Miller and I as and a few others as kind of the sole survivor that can tell these kinds of stories. Now, I've abbreviated mine quite a bit because I'm not the hero of any of these tales. I just tell what I saw and learned by osmosis. But anyway, there's your introduction.
Okay, well, thank you, David.
Hey, can I make a suggestion?
You bet.
How about if I leave this meeting, just drop off? It looks to me like I might be captive to your computer and your screen. How about if I drop out and ask to come back in again, and you let me back in a minute or two, and we'll just see if things are better. Because right now things are not real good. When somebody talks on your end, I'm only getting about half of it.
I don't know if that will work, but I hate to lose you.
Well, I mean, it's not any worse than it already is. You can get me on the phone,
Okay.
and that if that's the only way I
Go ahead.
if that's the only way that anybody's going to hear me, we may as well just go for it that way. Let's try it. I'm going to click off of here, and in about 30 seconds, I'll ask to come back. And in the meantime, you guys go about business as usual. Alan can entertain you all night, so just go ahead and just let's see what happens. So goodbye for now, and I'll be right back.
Okay. Okay, I think, Alan, to begin with, let's just talk for a moment about, we got the route map up here, and the Chicago area is being covered up by people, but basically the Pacific extensions up there. You want to, this was just a branch line, the Everline was. You want to basically say a little bit, get a little bit bigger picture about Milwaukee Road. I mean, it was the last transcontinental railroad to come here, correct?
Yeah, they realized around the turn of the century that if they didn't expand, they were just going to become another Granger Road in the Midwest. And so they surveyed a route out to the Pacific Northwest, got approval, and about 1905 they started breaking ground and started building out to the crews everywhere along the route, just together. Final completion of the main line was the bridge at Beverly, which just got opened here recently to hikers, bicyclers, and horses. They put a new deck on the Beverly Bridge across the Columbia River there. That was the last link in the completion of the main line. So the main line was opened in the summer of 1909, just in time for the Alaska Yukon Pacific Expedition down in Seattle. And that was another reason that they were pushing to get the line finished so quickly. Milwaukee picked up a lot of passenger business from that. Plus, they got advertising in the exposition itself. And then they, after a couple of years, they looked to building a branch line down the valley. First, they built one to Enumclaw off the main line below Cedar Falls. It was a 17-mile branch to the Weyerhaeuser Mill in Enumclaw. And then the following year, they started building down through the valley here. And when they got down into this lower valley, the Great Northern had gotten in ahead of them and built a branch line from Monroe to Carnation. And they built it as the Everett Cherry Valley Traction Company. So some of these farmers signed off their land for free because they thought it was going to be a rapid transit line to Monroe. So you didn't have to spend all day in a horse and a wagon to get to Monroe to get supplies. So they thought this would be a great thing. Well, after the railroad got built, they realized it was a branch of the Great Northern. And the best that they got was what they call a mixed train, where they put freight cars on the front of the train and a couple of passenger cars on the rear. And it took 45 minutes to get from Duvall to Monroe because they had to stop at every little shingle mill and pick up a car here or set a car out. And so it was pretty slow. And the Milwaukee came in and started buying land about 6 months behind the Great Northern. So the Great Northern had to build 18 miles from Monroe to Carnation. Milwaukee had to build 55 miles from Cedar Falls to Everett. Milwaukee come in behind the GNs by 6 months, and when they completed their lines, they completed them almost exactly the same week. So, but the Milwaukee had the advantage of once the GN had gotten rails down to certain points, they could ship in heavy equipment on the Great Northern and use it to build the Milwaukee. The Great Northern didn't have that advantage. They didn't have any way to ship in heavy equipment unless they just built a line and extended as they went. And another trick the Milwaukee did was when they come in and bought their land, they bought a right of way between the Great Northern and the river. And so they squeezed out the Great Northern on a lot of the shingle mills that were located on the riverbank. They got their track in between, and so they got the lion's share of the business out of there. And this line here was completed in November of 1911, but the station here at Duvall was opened on October 8th, 1911. They had enough tracks down Cedar Falls to be able to haul freight down to here. So Toll and Duvall stations were opened on the same day, October 8th, 1911. And I can't remember the name of the agent at Carnation or Toll, but he wasn't there very long. He quit the railroad and became a detective in Tacoma. And so the guy that replaced him was named Luther Silsby. And so he Toll Depot is just a nice, like Duvall and Carnation depots are almost identical. They were built to the same plans. And the first agent here at Duvall was a guy named J. Roy Lucas, and he actually worked out of a boxcar to start with, and then we got the depot built into that. Further agents here was they had, when J. Roy Lucas left, they had a series of temporary agents. And then the first real permanent agent here was named Stanley Burke, S.A. Burke. And Mrs. Burke, his widow, lived in Duvall for many years after he was. In fact, he's buried up in the Novelty Cemetery.
Alan, did you want to talk a little bit there? Everett wasn't supposed to be the end of the line, correct?
No, when they built the line, they intended to build it all the way to Bellingham. And I've seen 2 or 3 different surveys. They were going to go north out of Everett, and they were going to buy up the Marysville and Northern Logging Company and use their right of way to get up as far as I think Bryant or some place up above Arlington. And then they were going to parallel the Great Northern's line along the coast there, get up to Bellingham. Another plan I saw was they were going to branch off at Monroe and go north, and they would go through Granite Falls, and they would actually go through Oso, which is a little town between Arlington and Darrington. They were going to cross the Northern Pacific Darrington branch there, and then they would come into Bellingham in a place called Colshan, which was on the end of their line coming out of Bellingham. And so they would have to then traverse the whole Bellingham Bay of British Columbia road to get into Bellingham proper.
And there was an operating line in Bellingham that was unattached to the rest of the railroad.
Yeah,
one in Fort Townsend too that was served by barge, right?
Right. The Bellingham line was built way back in the 1890s by the Bellingham Bay of British Columbia Railroad. And the Milwaukee bought that line in 1911 and renamed it the Bellingham and Northern Railroad. And it operated under that name until about 1918, and then the Milwaukee just absorbed it into the system, and it became what they called the Bellingham Division. And it was served by barges from Seattle, just like Fort Townsend is. And the barges would come in, unload the cars, then they load the barge up with loads going out, haul them back to Seattle, and unload them. And they also bought or built a line over on the Olympic Peninsula from 30 miles west of Port Angeles all the way to Port Townsend. Western River, and they still operated that right up until the end of 1980.
You want to talk just a little bit about before we get up just on the branch line, about the Transcontinental Railroad that went over Snoqualmie Pass, which a lot of people know is the tunnel that they can take the bike part of the bike trail now, the tunnel at Snoqualmie. But that was all electrified, which was really kind of ahead of its time. It actually helped drive the cost of the construction of the railroad considerable.
they first electrified about 600 miles of their main line in Montana, beginning, I believe, around 1915. And that worked very well, especially in the mountainous regions where they get severe cold and stuff, because electric engines actually work better in the cold than they do in warm weather. And so they had a distinct advantage over steam locomotives. And so the Montana electrification worked so well that they decided to electrify the coast division from Othello to into Tacoma and Seattle. And they completed that in 1920. But it was expensive because the Milwaukee had already installed automatic block signals on their line. And those block signals worked on direct current. And that's the same current that was used to electrify the main line. And they had to run that current through the rails. So it was incompatible with the signals. So they had to redo all the signals and make them AC current so that they wouldn't interfere with the electrification, or the electrification actually interfere with the signals.
Okay, we have David back on.
We do.
David, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Can people hear? Good, good. Folks, we're going to stop just for one quick second and do a station identification right here. The reason why you heard recording come on is not because I actually retired from the government, so don't worry. It's actually being used. I'm making this into a radio program. I do have a radio program called Tales from Toll. Alan's been my guest on it several times, and I hope you can check it out. It's broadcast. Where is Scott? Right here. There. Scott, you want to do a little pitch for our local radio station? 104.9 FM. That's about as short as you can get. So, but still, I'm really grateful of the station. They've been very, very generous to me, and I broadcast about 4 times a week. And I recorded, even though I live in Kennewick, Washington, I recorded it with local guests, with my upcoming guests, is about the Lucius families. And their colleagues have been on there, and other families. Cap of the Everline, I want to talk about a few of the uniquenesses of this line. It was not originally created primarily became a log line, but David, it was basically started to be basically the western terminus of a transcontinental railroad. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe you're talking to me. You're cutting out really badly. I'm only getting about half of what you're saying, but yeah, Everett was supposed to be on equal footing with Seattle and Tacoma as the western terminal of the railroad. The line was supposed to be built pretty much to mainline standards, and I guess in 1911 it would be fair to say that it was.
Okay, and we all learned that it stopped construction. Is there a reason why they stopped at Everett? Was it funding?
Yeah.
Probably,
David, do you have a different perspective of that? Was it basically the cost overrun of the construction?
I see it exactly the same way. They ran out of money and they intended to do something later because, like Alan said, they made all sorts of surveys. I also saw one where they supposedly were purchasing the English Lumber Company, which had a lot of track that would have been to their advantage north of Marysville. And of course, that never happened. But they were always planning to do something and then just never did it.
David, you're a Great Northern guy. You worked for the Great Northern Railroad, and at one time, this town didn't have one railroad; it had 2. The Great Northern was here also, and the Great Northern went as far south as where?
Do you mean in the Snoqualmie Valley?
Yes.
Well, they went to Carnation. They intended to go further, but never did. They ran out of money too, I guess.
Happens to all of us, I guess. Yeah, it basically terminated about at the Yurtis Farm, which is the current location of the Toll Historical Society, and they coexisted for short while, Alan, and then can you explain about what happened?
Yeah, they coexisted for about 6 years, and then in 1917, the Great Northern was pretty much forced over onto the Milwaukee Road by the United States Railroad Administration. They came in and tried to eliminate a lot of duplicate trackage. So they put the Great Northern's little train over on the Milwaukee, and it ran back and forth between Monroe and Carnation on Milwaukee tracks. And then at Carnation, they had a spur called the Grain Spur that kind of snaked through town and came around the back of the grain. One of the newspaper articles I saw of the Great Northern line was they had plans to build up through Snoqualmie Pass and go through Dutch Miller Gap, and then out to Wenatchee. It was going to become a secondary main line and have lesser grades than Stevens Pass. So if that had come to fruition, our little meeting here would probably be interrupted tonight with the BNSF train blowing through town.
Main line still be here.
Yeah.
Hey, Alan.
So, go ahead, David.
Alan, why don't you, this would be a good time, and you can tell it because I've heard you tell it before. Tell the story about how James Hill's son-in-law, Sam Hill, and his Good Roads program shot the railroad companies in the foot because the railroads didn't see this coming. They didn't see the incursion of the highways. So if you could tell everybody about that right now.
Well, yeah, the Milwaukee had a Good Roads program too. In fact, right here in Duvall, the agent here, J. Roy Lucas, got involved in fixing up some of the roads here in the valley, and he arranged for the Milwaukee to bring in several cars of gravel to contribute to the project. And then he saw that nobody lacked for a shovel. He furnished railroad shovels for everybody that worked on the road, but it was a big campaign to fix up the roads in the country, and the Great Northern was one railroad that really got behind that project and did a lot towards it. The idea being that if they had better roads, then the people could get to the depots and take the train. But once they were in their cars, they just go right on past the depot. So it ended up taking a lot of pasture business away from the railroad, and probably a certain amount of freight business even back then.
So do either one of you want to talk about when the railroads consolidated, the Great Northern, or the Milwaukee Road line from Monroe to Everett is hardly noticeable because it's outfield even today. But down here through the valley, part of the line became the county road, and the county road shifted from being a very rugged road up on the hill, and what we drive on 203 is part of the railroad grade in places, correct?
Yeah. Highway 203 is right on the Great Northern's grade from about the bottom of Bay Road out by Stillwater. From there all the way to this side of the roundabout at Novelty, you're driving on the old Great Northern road bed. Then the Great Northern snakes down through the valley and comes into town. That was all trestle when it was Great Northern. It was over a mile, I think a mile and a third of trestle. And they had iron sheeting nailed down on the ties to keep it from catching fire from hot breaks and things. And it used to be the ambition of people in the valley to try to ride their bicycle all the way across that trestle on that sheet metal without get to the other end before a train showed up.
That'd be YouTubers.
And then you're from there, you're still on the Great Northern line until you get about to where Tualco Road cuts off. And then the Great Northern kind of meanders out through the cow pastures there, and it crosses the river and comes into Monroe.
So the Great Northern had trackage rights on the Milwaukee for a while after their tracks were torn up.
Yeah, it was only a few months. It was like from August 1917 till I believe May of 1918.
But the Milwaukee and the GN guys had to get along, and Monroe, that always happened, didn't it?
Well, there's stories in the valley. I don't know how true they were. I know that the Milwaukee had to build an overhead bridge from up where the school road is. They had to build a bridge there to get over the railroad tracks, and Great Northern didn't want that bridge over their tracks. And the stories that were told, whether they were true or not, is that Milwaukee would go down there and drive piling for that bridge, and then shut down for the day, and the Great Northern section men would come in and set it on fire and burn the pilings up overnight.
The railroad was served by a telegraph line. I remember the telephone telegraph line very well as a kid. They had these big glass insulators on them, 2 lines. It was once not Western Union, but something like Continental, right?
Continental Telegraph Company was owned wholly by the Milwaukee Road.
And people could go down to the depot and send a telegram in Duvall or Carnation using that.
Yeah, there was telegraph here, and I was looking at the crowd here, and the depot probably wasn't this crowded on election night. But during elections, everybody would come down here to get the results as they come in over the wire.
That's actually a really good segue, and we're actually right on time. It's at 6:40. At 6:40, I don't know if you want to take this or Dave wants to take this. It's about Society Red quickly. Who wants to take up that story about old Society Red?
How about if I tell a little bit and Alan can finish the story? Alan can tell any story that I can tell. Can you hear me okay?
No, it wasn't election results, but the story that Ralph Taylor used to tell me about Society Red was that he'd come down here and he'd lean against the depot building, and he could hear the telegraph
And he knew
inside,
Morse
and
code.
he knew Morse code because he was an operator. I believe he worked for the Union Pacific, but I think he got canned for drinking on the job. So he migrated to Duvall, and he would work on the section crew here, and they had those hand pump cars, and he would dress all spiffy in a vest and a straw hat, everything, but pumping the hand car was too menial for him. So Ralph said he would kind of push down on the handle as it came down, but he wouldn't lift up on it. Everybody else would be pumping it. He'd just kind of play along. But he used to hang out here at the depot and stuff. And so he come down here one time when there was a big prize fight. And I know one of the guys was named Jess Willard, and I can't remember who the opponent was. But anyway, he leaned against the building and he heard the results of the fight. So he went uptown and started blabbing all over town that the fight was over and who won. Meanwhile, Stanley Burke, the depot agent, he had to wait for the train to get the mail, and then he could go uptown. And so when he finally got the mail and headed uptown, he thought he was going to have this great story to break, and he got up there and everybody already knew about it. So after that, he wouldn't even let Stanley come, or let Society Red come down and lean against the building anymore.
Society Red was like a Twitter. Slideshow. I appreciate you doing there. Dance through. We're at that point where we want to talk about Carnation Farms. She's dialing that up. Here we are. Go through the slides real quick. Sorry, we kind of got lost with the. Hold it, Rick. So this is a covered bridge, right?
Yeah, that's the one. Monroe, I believe.
Monroe. Yeah. Why were they covered?
To protect the main timbers from rot, because they were expensive, big long timbers and straight grain and expensive to replace.
And the toll trestle was covered too,
Yes.
but Griffin Creek never was, right?
No, it never had a covering on it. The main covered ones were at Tanner, North Bend, Carnation. There was 2 at Monroe and 2 at Snohomish.
And this is a picture. Correct?
Yeah, they were 65 pounds to the yard.
And
And-
like current
and-
rail
and
typically is.
Approximately 80% of the original rails were still on this line when they shut it down.
Wow. Wow. And you know, down in Monroe right now, we looked at that, what would that rail be?
Oh, the BNSF rail? Oh, I don't know, maybe 130 pound, maybe more than that. I don't know.
Or double what this was. So that's why the track really got at repair. This is a typical speeder. The section crews all ran, and those were always great delight. They had a speeder set off right by my grandfather's farm by Camp Del Bosco, and so you could see them sometimes set their car off there, and also, like I said, Cecil Gilhart had a little funny looking little cab over Dodge near
Yeah, it was a Dodge,
A100.
yeah, something like that.
It's a little. I think they got a good price on this.
Well, I can remember Ted Horst was the section foreman at Carnation for a while. And I can remember seeing him and his wife in a speeder like that going to Monroe. And they'd go down to Woods Creek there at Monroe and park the speeder and go over to the Safeway, do their grocery shopping, and bring it back, load in the speeder, go back to Carnation. All on the company gas.
One of the people that worked on this railroad, I'll just interject this, was a Jerry Shively. And I had a good conversation with him. He couldn't join us tonight, but he did bring my Rice, which is the work of this man. And he was sharing stories with me. He told about the one time he was on a speeder like this coming from a pinochle or a poker game or something down by Green River. And he was on the main line going up to Cedar Falls, and he had been drinking quite a bit, and he leaned over to heave out of the speeder, and he fell out of the speeder, and the speeder continued on. And he ran through, they had phones alongside, and they're far apart, but he knew where it was, and he said he sobered up by the time he got to the phone. And he called, and Jerry, started with the B, Jerry,
Red Schneider.
yeah, evidently took the call and said, hey, my speeder's going to be coming up there, so-and-so, and he said, well, I'll put the coffee on. He said, you don't seem to understand, I'm not going to be on it. And he said, what? He went out and turned the switch and derailed the speeder. Are we at Carnation? Alan, you want to explain this?
Well, this is the train register. Tons they had and what time they departed and what the engine number was. It was just a record of train departures and arrivals. And so when they arrived back in the morning, they had to register on one side of the book, and when they left in the evening, they register on the other side. This book contains the last entry for the last train up the valley here.
50 years ago today. And this is the old timetable that I have. This is Jerry Shively, when he moved to East Washington, he gave me a bunch of his stuff, his section foreman. And this is one of, I took a picture of this on the couch before I came over here. This is the old timetable for this line. Looks like it's approximately.
Gone now.
Already. Just talk about society grad. Okay, here's the next. So one of the major, I worked for a Carnation company for a good 10 years, but long before I did, they shipped cattle by rail. They were always big on exporting cattle. The entrances to the farm, of course, were where they are today. But back in this day, the entrance to the farm was actually quite different, and it actually went down through the valley, left the Carnation Farms barns, and went down through the valley. And Alan, you want to pick it up from there about where it actually, where the Stewart siding was?
Yeah, they built a sidetrack to serve Carnation Farms, this side of Stillwater, where my Uncle Glenn used to have his farm there. It was down on his property there. There's still a wide spot in the trail, behind the trail, where it used to be. And it was originally called the Carnation Spur for the farm. And then in 1917, the town of Tolbert changed their name to Carnation to honor the farm. So now you had a confusion between two locations with the same name, so they changed the name of Carnation Spur to Stewart. And they shipped a lot of purebred cattle into the farm there. I have a picture of 25 head of cattle that came from Oconomowoc, Wisconsin, that was shipped in. I think the first shipment of purebred cattle that come into the farm. And so they had a photographer out there to take pictures of them. And they came in a baggage, or actually an express car, a passenger car, because they were shipped by Wells Fargo Express. I always wondered who got to clean out that express car afterwards. But and they used to ship purebred calves, and I had there's a conductor that I used to know. He passed away now, but Robert Freeman, he worked the swamp. Boots and take it up to Cedar Falls, and then it would go on the baggage car on the passenger train. So Stewart, E.A. Stewart, really pampered his cows, and you know, when the home of contented cows, I guess they get first class service.
Alan, you want to tell the story about the one time that you took a picture out to the old site of the old Stewart?
Yeah, my grandfather, they had a automobile or a truck accident at Stewart one time. They were hauling gravel in an old Riker truck, and they got hit by a train. And they claimed that there wasn't enough visibility at the crossing there, so they got my grandfather, who was the only guy in the valley that could get on short notice that had a camera, I guess. So they got him to go down there, and he took a half a dozen pictures of the truck and the siding and stuff down there. We were going through old pictures down at my grandma's house one time, and I saw this picture, and it had the sign on there that said Stewart. And I go, oh, I know where that place is. And I got so excited about it that they gave me the pictures. And so I took the pictures down because I knew where the old siding had been. And Lindy Brown was with me one day. We were just talking about this a little bit ago. And I was holding the picture up, and I was going, okay, well, he must have stood about here and took the picture. And I walked up a ways, and the sign stood right about here. And I looked down into the gully off the embankment, and I saw a white board down there, and I thought, nah, it couldn't be. But I climbed down there anyway, and I turned that thing over, and it said Stewart on it. And that sign had been laying there since 1957, and this was 1972. And there was actually two of the signs. The other one, there was just a little bit of a left that it hadn't rotted away, but I took the pieces. There was about 3/4 of the sign was still intact. The frame around it and everything was gone. I took it home and screwed it to some plywood, and then I built a new frame for it. Then I hauled it back out there, and I found a post, and I stuck it up on a post and took some pictures of it in 1972 before they shut the railroad down. And I still have that at home in my shed. I would have brought it tonight, but I didn't want to go dig it out.
And Carnation Farms is back in the ownership of the Stewart family. And Elbridge Stewart wants that sign, and it's in retirement, but we'd rather be benefit. So, I'll just retell the story I was always told. So does everybody understand when Alan said where that road, when you went to Carnation Farms, the long straightaway between Carnation and Duvall, his uncle, right? Lane?
Yeah.
Picture of it here. There's the cattle being loaded down at their own siding. They all have their blankets on. There's the bridge. So this bridge was down. It was Carnation Farms.
I don't have any pictures.
Retired too. This is the Carnation Farms Bridge, and the story is that this bridge, they had a load of hay going across there with two drivers, and this bridge collapsed and killed the boy. That man was on it, and Stewart built a house for her in Carnation for the mother. He was a young boy unmarried, built a house for her mother, and then they decided to do, when that bridge collapsed, they had to do something else. And so by that time, I think they had access to the county road where they think of it today. But that's you can still go down there and still see if you went out past the cattery, the old what they call the cattery. You can still see some of the old pilings in that bridge. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, somewhere in my files, I got the name of the truck driver that got killed on that bridge. Wes Larson told me the whole story about it one time. So I took notes.
And this is this they redid the decking or something for the invoice to the Stewart was complaining about repairs on his thing, and they did a bunch of repairs for it.
Oh, it's a mill platform. They would Carnation Farms used to ship all their milk out to the condensery in Monroe in boats. They had a boat with a little barge that they tow along, and they would handle the milk shipments, but it wasn't without problems. The milk boat was constantly breaking down or sinking, and stuff. I have several newspaper accounts from the Monroe Monitor about the Carnation milk boat being lost. And they had to rustle up farmers with wagons and haul the milk all the way to Monroe by wagon. But when the railroad got up and running, then Carnation Farms started shipping the milk by train. And so the Milwaukee built a milk platform there at Stewart for them to load cans on it. And they didn't build it big enough. Mr. Stewart wrote them a rather curt letter about the fact that the milk platform that the Milwaukee provided was only held about 90 cans, and he said that they needed one that would handle 200 cans. Plus, he needed a cover on it because it left the cans exposed to the sunshine. So that's what this is. This was the.
Did you tell what the whopping cost was around?
Huh?
The whopping cost of this construction was $18.
Yeah. They didn't want to spend 25 to make the.
And Helen Mitchell was her name, and she told a story when she was a little girl that there was obviously something going on, and Duvall fire truck left and screaming feed out of Duvall, and here come Monroe Fire Department coming screaming through, and so they knew something was wrong, and they went, and so they jumped into their car and followed to see what it was, and they got down there to where the Millers, and they looked across, and the Carnation Farms barn, the original barn, which you see was up in flames.
Wow.
Up in flames. And that was like a 5-alarm fire, I think.
Yeah.
And they built it in the grand style that it is today. It was a lot different looking barn. You saw old pictures of the old barn. That was the age of it. Just want to talk a little bit. Want to just advance a little more slide. Don't have very many slides on this. Just that logging really. You want to just elaborate a little bit, Alan, about how important logging become and things like the Cherry Valley Logging Company that had its camp, which is now Camp Bosco, and other major
logging and lumber products was the mainstay of this line. It's what the line was built for, and it's what kept the line going for many years. You had several logging companies that used to dump their logs into the Snohomish River and just float them down to. They'd go to Snohomish, and at Snohomish they had booms to catch most of these logs, and the logs had brands on them so that they'd know who they belonged to. And they would boom them down to Snohomish, and then riverboats would come up from Everett and take tows of logs down to Everett to the various sawmills down there to process into lumber. But shipping the logs by the river was a long, slow process, and they would lose a certain amount of logs, would get hung up or sink or whatever. So again, like Carnation Farms with their milk, when the railroad came through the valley, the logging company saw a better way to move their logs. So there was two pretty good sized logging companies right here in the valley. Cherry Valley Logging Company that started north of Duvall as a small outfit, moved to Stillwater, and they built a huge network of railroad tracks up on Stillwater Hill. There was at the peak there was a total of 50 miles of main line and spur tracks up there on Stillwater Hill, and they would ship anywhere up to 60 cars a day of logs out of Stillwater. And they built a log dump down below Snohomish in a place called Riverview. Snohomish. And the other big company was High Rock, Stephen Bird Logging Company, but they were locally called the High Rock Logging Company. And I don't have a log count on them, but I think they were shipping anywhere from 20 to 30 cars a day. They kind of split there between the Great Northern and the Milwaukee down there at High Rock.
Most of these logging camps were actually, the bunkhouses were actually, could be loaded up on rail cars.
Yeah, they were actually built on rail cars, and they once this area was logged out, they just couple them all together and drive up to a new spur somewhere and set them out up there and go back to work. And there's a story about E.A. McDonald, that was Ronald McDonald, excuse me, not to be confused with the guy from McDonald's driving, but R.A. McDonald was the superintendent for Cherry Valley up in Stillwater. There was a story about how the Milwaukee Road couldn't furnish empty cars for him for the day. They didn't have any empties to give him. So he brought his log train down to the Milwaukee down at the bottom of the hill and unloaded all the logs on the side of the railroad, and then called the Milwaukee and said, "Your logs are there. Get them out of here." And he took the empties back up and loaded them. He wasn't going to be shut down just because they couldn't get empties to him. And they logged off Stillwater about 1924. And so they moved to a new camp up on Griffin Creek, where the CYO camp was their main headquarters camp. And they built spur lines up along Griffin Creek there.
Oh, it's narrow gauge railroads, right? Spur lines were narrow gauge.
No, they were standard.
Well, they were standard.
Because they actually used Tacoma Eastern log flats.
Oh.
Cherry Valley didn't own any of their own log cars, so they just leased log flats from the Milwaukee, and the Milwaukee furnished these. They were basically just wooden decked flat cars, but they had what was called a turtleback bunks on them to hold the logs, and the logs just held on there by little nubs. And then when they get to the log dump, they could go on one side of the car and pull a deal and would release it, and then the logs would roll off of the car. And so yeah, it was all standard gauge, but they really got the logging up there on Griffin Creek, because I've read old timers tell me that when they were in the old high school, after day of 100 cars. They were bringing down 100 cars a month a day. Watch these shows like Axemen where they load 13 trucks in one day and think they just great job. And they have all this modern equipment to do it with.
Just briefly want to tell people that this man is helping with a lot of research projects in the past. One of the things that Alan helped me with is I compiled a video together. I should say I did. You can tell with my technical skills are. So my son and my daughter did this for me. They helped me compile together a 6-minute video with a lot of pictures I got from Alan and some from the family. And if you just Google search Horik Davidson, you will find it and watch it. It's about a 6-minute video. It's about a remarkable gentleman that was part of Milwaukee Road's history. That settled in it's now renamed, it just sold again, a winery that's about southeast 8th Street, just south of Carnation. And that was a one time a very beautiful estate owned by the chief engineer that constructed the Milwaukee Tunnel. His name was John Horrocks. And at one time it had a giant fountain in the front that was most of the brook being diverted from fishing game would have a lovely time of that nowadays, but and a big brick silos and a big gentleman farm, and they had a major estate. But it's if you see those black and white striped cows, the Dutch belted cows out there, that's the farm I'm talking about. That was a big estate farm, and he was a colorful fellow that was had a remarkable career building this Milwaukee Tunnel right out.
Yeah, he was an engineer, designing stuff, and he worked for the Milwaukee Road, and he was the chief engineer in charge of the Snoqualmie Tunnel when he boarded. And to his credit, Snoqualmie Tunnel, for the size of the project that it was, didn't have a single fatality.
Which is really remarkable.
Yeah, for those days and stuff, and the kind of work they were doing. And Horrocks was a contractor. He had a lot of equipment, including narrow gauge railroads that he would use to haul film material and stuff. He also worked on the rebuilding of the bridges over in Idaho after the big fire of 1910 burned down a lot of the Milwaukee bridges in the Bitterroot Mountains. So he was in charge of rebuilding those bridges. And his wife served as postmistress at Rockdale when they were building the Snoqualmie Tunnel. She ran the post office up there because they had, I think, around 500. Working, but the Horrocks bought this farm in Carnation. He had a spur built there that it was called Horrocks Spur, and you could find it in the employee timetables. And he used to keep his equipment stored on that spur until he needed it someplace, then the railroad haul it to wherever he wanted.
I did some research on that farm when I did the video of it, and I thought it was interesting. I found the original offer from the real estate agent to the Quallings that later became associated with property a little bit further south, Quallings Corner. Realtor offer on the property said a single woman with kids is just trying to, a widow trying to still make a living, building a few cows, and would like to make an offer that felt real bad and give it to her. She had no children. She was a descendant of the Agnews, who were major developers. And she was married to the chief engineer of the thing. So you tried to get a good deal however you could. I thought that you got to be careful what you do, because some things survive forever. And this offer paper was right there. And so other colorful person I think we should tell real quick is Cecil Gilhart. His uncle, actually, he was a roadmaster here in Kentucky. You want to tell that story?
Yeah, his uncle Herman Gilhart was roadmaster, headquartered out of Monroe when the line was first built through here, and then a couple couple of years after that, he got transferred to a little town called Roundup, Montana. So he was roadmaster there, and then his son became roadmaster, which was Cecil's cousin. And so at the same time that Cecil Gilhart was roadmaster up here in Cedar Falls, his cousin was roadmaster in Roundup, Montana. So when you were looking through officials, you saw the name Gilhart twice with the same position. But Cecil was born in, I believe he was born in Cedar Falls, but his dad was section foreman. His dad's name was Otto Gilhart, and he was a section foreman at Bain, which was a station on that line that they built to Enumclaw. And so Cecil grew up in the little town of Bain, and he went to work on the section crew as soon as he was old enough to hired on, and eventually worked his way up to roadmaster, and he was headquartered out of Cedar Falls. And he had territory all the way over to Beverly, Washington on the Columbia River, and then the Everett line, the Enumclaw line, and I think his territory ended at Maple Valley, westbound.
On this line.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
There was a time, well, Herman got sent to Roundup pretty early, and so there was a guy named W.R. Hunt that was roadmaster out of Cedar Falls for quite a number of years until Cecil worked his way up.
Let's just quickly talk about a couple other local individuals. We had the section foreman early on, a few years back. It was Bob here, his grandfather Louis Luchas
Was Coronation second
Carnation.
foreman, and I believe Louis Luchas was actually on a section up of a place called Cheviot, which was up on Boylston Hill on the main line before he came to Coronation.
And then another Greek had a section foreman here, and I never get his name right.
Oh, Unopoulos.
Unopoulos.
Is that a Greek god or I got Greek?
Unopoulos was the section foreman at the same time Louis, right?
Yeah,
He
Harry,
was the section foreman.
Harry Unopoulos. And one of the stories that Ralph Taylor told us, his nickname was Cut of the Bush. Because on rainy, crappy days, he would send his men out. He said, "What are we gonna do today? Cut of the bush." They have to go out and cut brush along the tracks, and they get soaking wet and have to work in wet clothes all the rest of the day.
Was it you that told the story, or it might have been my grandfather that said that he also cleared that they used to use kerosene to burn the right of way,
Oh, yeah.
and he would say they were going to burn it. So he said, "How do we do this?" And he'd tell the hired man, "Start pouring and run," and this kerosene would be jug, and he'd run down the and he'd be looking back to see what Annapolis, right?
Right.
Annapolis was going to do. He just waited till he had about an eighth of a mile down. Imagine. And the fire started catching up with the guy pretty quick. He started running a little faster.
Well, he figured by an eighth of a mile, you didn't have much left in the jug.
No, it was probably time to take the speeder up there.
He wouldn't get burned too badly by then, so. But I believe it, as I understand it, Harry Knopf's daughter was the wife of Jack Frommer that owned the hardware store before Dave Carter got the store here in town. If I got my facts right. But another story about Harry Knopflis is they were out working somewhere along the line, and there was a big cherry tree there just loaded with cherries. So after lunch, he had everybody climb up in the trees with their lunch boxes and start filling them with cherries. And they were merrily picking cherries when all of a sudden in the distance they heard the woo, woo, train coming. Harry kind of wiped his brow and said, "No more chitty, boys, no more chitty."
And just for the record, we got an equal number of stories about Louis Luchas, but Bob's sitting right there, so we'll forego them right there. So, you want to advance to the next, this picture is really bad resolution, but it's a copy out of one of the papers. It's actually provided, this is a Cecil Gilhart picture. This is actually the Great Northern Train going through the structure. Not too many pictures of, there are a few of the Great Northern, and this is one of it under steam coming down through Cherry Valley.
Yeah, this was actually taken south of Duvall, about where, I don't know what that is now, but it was built as a state highway department maintenance shed. A bit south of Duvall here. And that picture was taken somewhere, I figure, right in the vicinity of that area. What was the county road there? You can see this little bridge is actually a cattle pass for one of the farmers so they get their cows from one side of the river.
Do we want to start talking? The Milwaukee Road went into 2 receiverships, 2 bankruptcies, at least, right, in the early years too.
Yep.
And then
I was just a victim of their third.
they really delayed a lot of maintenance. They kept trying to keep their profit margins up to attract a buyer by delaying maintenance. And it really got really noticeable and bad to where the train coming through town here, even I can remember as a kid, were pretty slow. And the tracks were pretty bad. And I can remember one time we invited him to be a guest here, the conductor was on the train that one day. I was actually already getting attached to the railroad and put a bunch of new ties in the brand new black, really fancy ties. And they weren't in, but what was it, a short amount of time? And the train a car
Derailed and then they drug it from, let's see,
Pleasant Hill,
yeah,
all the way across
I
the
think it was went off, I think around milepost 17 and Carnation at milepost 22. So
drug it all the way to Carnation. And the ties, brand new ties, just really sliced really bad. I could remember that actually made me angry saying,
yeah. Well, when they hit the switch at Carnation, then the whole thing went off and they derailed like 7 cars plus the caboose. The conductor knew something was up then when the caboose went on the ground, but they're supposed to walk out on the back of the caboose every so often and look at the ties because you can tell if you're dragging a car, you can see the
coming out looking for the purchase of this to become the bike trail that is today. Matter of fact,
yeah, you have
Chris, one of those.
Ralph Taylor there, and then Lloyd Judd was the mayor of Duvall at that time, and Ralph was the former mayor.
Chris Lucius was actually pretty instrumental in that.
They picked up the mayors from the various towns along the route and gave them a ride. It was a whole convoy. This was the superintendent's high rail inspection car. It was a Chrysler Newport, and it was nicknamed the Black Mariah. And then you had the trolley car T1, and then you had the Cecil Gilhart's high rail car, and then there was another high rail. I'm not sure if that was a signal maintainer or high rail. That
one of those guys is West. It looked like West Micros actually.
And I know this guy over here is John Tobenek. He's a logging historian, rail fan.
What year was this?
This was 1975.
They were planning a bike trail back then.
Oh yeah, it was in the county bought it and it sat in dormancy for years and years and years before they ever finally made it into a trail. And once the county bought it, they put no trespassing signs up on it. And I got caught one time down in Stewart with my cousin. A game warden showed up and claimed that he got a report that we were poaching ducks out there in the field. And I said, I wasn't even carrying a stick, let alone a gun. And he tried to con me into that he had another partner that was going to come because there was snow on the ground, and he had a partner that was going to follow our tracks. And if he found a gun, some dead ducks stashed somewhere. We were going to jail. And I said, well, if your so-called partner finds anything, it'll be a miracle. And I said, so far, I haven't heard your partner talking on the radio, so I don't get to even have one. And he started threatening me, and I told him I've done nothing wrong, when in reality I was trespassing on county property, but he didn't even realize that. He was more worried that I was poaching some ducks out of the pond out there.
Alan, what year did they pull up the rails?
They pulled the rails up the year after this, the winter of 1976.
When did the ties come out and become a trail?
Well, the ties came out in 76 when the rails come out, because any ties that were halfway decent, they could sell them for, maintenance, lawn maintenance type projects. So it was a mess. It got to the point where you couldn't even hardly hike on it because the blackberries had taken it over so bad, just like it is north of Duvall now. But yeah, it was funny. They put up signs that said that this is going to be a future trail or whatever, but those signs aged and fell over.
What year was it made a trail?
I'm not sure. I gave up on it. And the next thing I knew, it's now a trail. But yeah, the county sat on it for a long time.
And we say this was the last train. Actually, Burlington Northern did run a train one time on this rail.
Well, that was before the real actual last train. The Milwaukee Ever Local went through on this night in February, but a few months later, I believe in May, they ran a train down here to clean out the siding, because the siding of Duvall had a whole bunch of old wooden chip cars that they had set in there to store, and they were down there where the old dehydrating plant is, that insulation place, and that building, part of that building had caught fire, and so those chip cars that were sitting down there were all, the sides were all charred from the heat from that fire, and I would say those chip cars were probably on that siding for 3 or 4 years. And it was funny because when I worked at Everett, there was a guy who actually wanted to ship stuff from Duvall from that building. He was looking at leasing that building and using the Milwaukee to load stuff out of there. Well, the Milwaukee was trying to discourage business on this line, not encourage it. So they told him that he couldn't load out of there, even though the siding ran right alongside his building. They said they had to keep that siding open for meeting trains. It's like, meeting what train? You got one train goes up and it comes back down. How's it going to meet? And
Why did they always run at night?
I think because of the switching the mills and stuff, they get all the loads at the end of the day, and Weyerhaeuser wanted that stuff to go as soon as it was ready. So I think they'd get the stuff out of the mills in the afternoon and make up a train, and then that way they could get it up there.
You ever have trouble with wobblies?
What?
You ever have trouble with wobblies?
Wobblies? I don't know. They probably had their share of problems when they tried to unionize the Cherry Valley Logging Company. That was owned by Weyerhaeuser, and oh, okay. Oh, cool. Wow.
Down this way, there's a farm called Long Valley across the range.
I know him, yeah. going down and staying with my cousin, Rick Miller, and we had a tent down on the riverbank there. And we go down and sleep in that. And my uncle had just bought 25 head of cows at the sale and brought them to the farm and unloaded them out in the field. And we were out there sleeping in the tent. And I heard the train whistle for an novelty. So I told my cousin, I want to go up to the tracks and watch the train come through. So we hiked up onto the grade, and as the headlight came around the corner, there was my uncle's 25 head of cows on the tracks. So we flagged the train down, and they had us get up on the front of the engine, and then we went slowly down and yelled at the cows until they parted the herd, and then they dropped us off right there at that trestle below across the ridge place, and then we had to walk back in the dark. And about halfway back, a coyote howled out in the field, and my cousin Rick was definitely afraid of coyotes. He took off running in the dark. I don't know how he didn't break his ankle or running across those ties.
This is the derailment right here at Duvall, right by the depot.
Yeah, this happened on, I believe it was Christmas Eve, 1970. And they had a broken rail at the west switch that got missed when the track inspector went over it that day. And they went on the ground with 2 units and a bunch of chip cars, buried this locomotive clear up to its nose in dirt.
726.
And
Fortunately, my corn person is tending to he's a fireman, and he's tending to a emergency.
Right there, yeah. The lights are there, the lights.
Yeah, we have a person having, just so everybody's aware, we have a person tending to first aid.
a cup of coffee. I started, the engine went on the ground. He said the coffee went up in the air, just kind of hung there for a second and came over.
That was a pretty bad deal. I got a couple pictures. My grandpa came and I got one picture of me peeking in the window, but I didn't put that in this slide. There's also a derailment just about the same time up at Griffin Creek Trestle, right before the trestle. Really incredible where the derailment happened.
Yeah, these locomotives hastened the demise of this line. They were really too heavy for the light rail that was on here. Cecil Gilhart made several complaints to the head officers about that, and they just basically ignored it.
So Alan, our board preoccupied. So can you please, there is another sign of the last train. You want to do that? The last station.
Oh, the OS?
OS.
Yeah.
Want to explain a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, as telegraph operators, we would be stationed at various depots, and you had a central dispatcher in the Milwaukee roads case. The dispatcher is in Tacoma, and we were basically the eyes and ears for the dispatcher. So when a train would go by your station, you had to be out on the platform and give the train a visual roll by to make sure there was nothing wrong, dragging on the cars or brakes sticking or anything like that. And you had to keep track of the engine number, and then after the train went by, then you would go in and you would call up the dispatcher and you report that train by. That way, he keeps a big train sheet, he's keeping track of all these trains. And by knowing the progress of these trains, he can figure out where they're going to meet other trains with the least amount of delay. So that procedure was called an OS, and the OS was telegraph code for on sheet. That meant that you had this train logged on your sheet, and now you were passing that information on to the train dispatcher. So we thought that we would do a last OS Duvall tonight for the ghost train. So that would go something like this. OS Duvall. Yeah, Duvall, I have the extra 8002 East by at 7:27 p.m. Engineer Griffin, Dr. Kilson, 6 loads, 29 empties, 1,324 ton, caboose 02041.
Thank Alan for coming down. He was at surgery and he made it track down here, so I really, really appreciate it. Apologies to Dave that didn't work out like it should. But sorry about that, Dave. He's extremely fascinating to talk to too. I can't get off the phone with him when I converse with him. He's a very, very knowledgeable.
Dave Sprout.
Oh. Yeah, hello.
I want to make one more commercial break. There's a new book out that everybody should go out and get a copy of. Stephen, you want to tell them about? There is a fantastic book just published about Valley history. Go on. Oh, good break. We got the whole writing team here.
To add. We've worked on it for about 4 years, found over 100 photographs in the book. We did a lot of research, so we think we're accurate. Hopefully it'll be enjoyable reading for anybody interested in riverboat history.
I sure appreciate it. I've only had I got it today, so I appreciate my signed copy, and it is an incredibly good quality book, very good pictures, and very well written. It's a voluminous book. I'm really impressed by how much you actually got written. It's absolutely, utterly amazing how much traffic there was on this river way of boats. It just was incredible.
River boats.
When the water was rising, it went all the way to Fall City. Water allowed, and it's an incredible. Incredible history. So
Yeah. I don't even know.
We also have Alan Miller's book.
Alan Miller has written so much about the Valley history. He's as impressive as he is on railroads, he has basically a history of this entire community. It's just amazing. And he's written several books, and one of them is available here. Digging up the past.
Digging Duvall's path. Yeah, that was a series of newspaper articles I did for the Snoqualmie Valley Record. It ran for about a year. And then the Duvall Historical Society collected them and put them together in a book.
Okay, well, if there's any, is there any last questions for Alan before we start?
Plus, I got several free lunches out of it.
Free lunches?
Yeah, they would,
You want to interview me?
who says there's no such thing as a free lunch?
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, I did the trail ride. wish that was close up.
Country, you want to take our picture?
Yes.
Up here, we'll stand by David.
Yes.
David,
Smile, David. That's right.
David, we're gonna take your picture.
I love that. Ready? David.
Smile, David. Okay. Would you send me that so I
Would
can
you
read the
come
radio?
over here because then the screen's not on your face? Okay, ready?
An interesting thing about this depot, if you look on the floor down there, you'll see holes in the wood going right up to the ticket window where loggers would come in with their cock boots on
Oh,
to
yeah.
buy tickets as they get out of town.
Was this only the depot that used to live here?
Yeah, it was just a depot, yeah. The agent had a private house on the riverbank.
And the section, the opposite, he lived up here, right?
Yeah.
He lives right up.
And I think he lived in a house in town, but the railroad actually sold a company house to the agent. I don't- Oh, yeah. Yeah, right, oh yeah, that's something. A lot of them got bought up by railroad employees because they were such nice houses that they sold them for. Yeah, see, I couldn't buy mine, I was living in one of the falls, but the watershed was buy them. They had to deal with railroad, railroad gone. I couldn't buy mine, but the ones like up in Kayak and stuff, those sold for like $500 for the house and the property. A lot of them were separate. Me and my neighbor thought about buying the three up in Kayak and then out ski out. Now they sell for $1,000. One of Kayak sold here a couple years ago. I think one of the ones in Cleveland sold.
Or volunteer, I should say.
That was another depot I worked in a lot, so I was pretty glad that they restored it. I went over there when they opened it up and they, you know, they had the restaurant.
The rest of the super.
Yeah.
Good barbecue, yeah.
Yeah, well, I still had a big meal chicken left over. I went over there and put it on the house. Oh, wow. Wow, yeah, the log across the creek. Yeah. When I was a little kid, it was my ambition to walk across that log. My grandma Nellie was ambition to stop me. I never did get across. Every time I hit the guard in that direction, she'd show up. Ellen, don't you go out on that log. Oh. Yeah. Oh, I think the water will come down that way. It's close. Yeah. Do you have a well there now to get water out of it? Because they were getting water out of the river. Oh,
I don't know if I want to get the water.
you kind of like to, hey, if you can river water, you can taste it in the water.
Well, yeah, it's nice soft water. Well, no, especially in the summertime when you got all the people floating down the river. Yeah, whenever you
Well,
never used to have that.
when I was a kid, there was a guy that drowned. Our house, water, drink that water until they found that body, and it ended up being my dad, a couple other guys. They didn't get this actually found it. They were down there fishing. Dale Thompson saw a barrel floating in the river, and they wanted that barrel to a fuel barrel. I went over to get it, and it kind of caught an eddy. When they got over there, my dad could smell it. He goes, I think that guy's here somewhere. They found him. 7, 8. Tried to lift him up into the boat, the meat was just falling off. Couldn't get it from it that way. Oh, yeah. First time I saw him for a while, because I down the red light across the street. Red light was coming at me, playing chicken. My guys off the side, there was one of those box cabs. Electric.
I remember we had for the aqua farm, we had friends of ours, right next door. So we go down there and play around. Go down Maple Mountain. There's lots of things that was here because the night. But you go down and see the light.
I got over that on the other side of the bridge. I would have put the strays.
Yeah, it's just size of people. I'd say 300 or 400 shorts. That would be great birds. That'd be a lot.
So it was.
I couldn't remember exactly where it was, so I went to the light. All the way up to where old brown house was. See down there, they had the light across the road. Pretty sure go blow it. Not that I like it. Sit down that road. Maybe I should have, as soon as I committed myself to the years and so y'all.
Take care of that knee.
Oh, yeah.
You want your cane? Right, yeah, that's true.